The wind came whispering down from the hills like a ghost with unfinished stories. It bent the long yellow grasses and rattled the old barn doors, shrill and sharp as broken fiddle strings. Winter had arrived early on the prairie that year, stealing the color from the earth and setting the sky a hard, metallic gray. The kind of sky that pressed down, heavy and low, as if daring the land to breathe beneath it. He had known it was coming, felt it in the aching joints of his knuckles, the way the animals grew restless, the silence that settled in just before the snow. He was a man who trusted silence more than he ever trusted speech. Words had always been slippery things, easily broken or misunderstood. Silence, though, silence was honest. He moved through his morning like he always did. No hurry, no waste. He fed the horses first, slapping hay into the troughs while his breath came out in clouds. One of the mares, old and slow, nudged his shoulder gently with her nose. He scratched her between the ears, not bothering to speak. She already knew what kind of man he was. Tall, lean, grizzled like a wild dog that had learned to outlast the pack. There was gray in his beard now and lines etched deep at the corners of his eyes, though he was not so old that time had finished with him. Just old enough that hope had stopped feeling useful. The town called him solitary. Some called him cold. There were stories, of course, there always were, that he once loved a girl who vanished in a flood, that his brother died out in Arizona, and he never forgave the sun for it, that he once rode with outlaws, but left before the killing started. Truth was, he never corrected any of them. What people believed didn't matter. What mattered was that the animals were fed, the fence line was sound, and the roof over his head didn't leak when the clouds opened up. That morning, the storm had not yet begun, but the wind told him it wouldn't wait long. He spent the afternoon securing the last of the supplies, stacking wood, checking the doors, covering the feed bins. The world felt as though it were holding its breath. When the snow did come, it came sideways. Not soft and fluttering like in children's books, but brutal, like shards of white glass hurled by invisible hands. He sat by the stove with a book he'd read a dozen times, turning pages not because he needed the words, but because he liked the feel of them. Outside, the barn groaned. The horses shifted restlessly in their stalls. Night pressed down. The wind howled and whined, and once or twice he thought he heard something else underneath it. A different kind of cry. Animal maybe? A fox or a wounded coyote. But there were rules on the prairie, and one of them was simple. Don't go chasing sounds in a storm. That's how folks disappeared. That's how frostbite claimed fingers and pride. So he ignored it. Until morning. The storm left behind a brittle silence. The kind that makes a man feel small, even if he's walked the same land for 30 years. The world was a single sheet of white, flat and endless. He moved slow as he opened the door, boots crunching into the drift piled up on his porch. Steam curled from his coffee mug as he stepped outside. The barn stood there like a soldier at attention, half buried but upright. He was halfway across the yard when he saw it. A shape slumped beside the barn wall, just where the snow drifted deepest. At first he thought it was a sack of feed someone dropped, but the closer he got, the less that lie held. It was a woman. She was curled against the barn like a dying bird, arms wrapped tight around her knees, hair stiff with ice. Her coat was thin, threadbare, barely a coat at all. One of her boots was missing, the sock soaked through, toes bluish and still. Her face was turned into the wood, as if trying to disappear into it. He didn't say anything, just knelt beside her and touched her shoulder. Her skin was cold but not lifeless. Not yet. He moved quickly then. Not with panic. He wasn't a man who panicked, but with a kind of hard precision. He gathered her into his arms and carried her into the house. She didn't stir, not even when he crossed the threshold. Inside, the stove burned hot, and he laid her near it on the old rug. Her body was light, too light. He wrapped her in every blanket he could find and peeled the wet clothes from her slowly, carefully, like handling glass. There were bruises, old ones, yellow and green around her ribs, a scar on her wrist, dirt beneath her fingernails. She looked young, but not like a girl. Mid-20s, maybe. Face thin, eyes sunken. But there was something strong in the lines of her mouth even as she slept. Something that refused to break. He watched her all day, never too far. Changed the blankets when they grew damp. Heated broth and spooned it between her lips when her eyelids fluttered. She drank without waking. When night fell again, she stirred. Her voice was paper thin. "Where am I?" He didn't answer at first. Just poured a little water and handed it to her. She drank. "You're safe," he said finally. Her eyes met his then, hollow-wide, untrusting. Eyes that had seen too much too young. She didn't ask his name, and he didn't ask hers. It was better that way. She tried to sit, failed, and lay back with a small groan. He didn't reach to help her. Just waited. "I didn't mean to trespass," she whispered. "You didn't." There was a silence, long and trembling, like a wire pulled taut. "Do you live here alone?" "Yes." She nodded faintly, like that made sense. Her eyes closed again, and she drifted. He didn't sleep that night. There were questions, of course. Where she came from. What she was running from. Why no one came looking for her. But he'd lived long enough to know that some answers don't arrive in a day. Some people are like cracked mirrors. You have to look at them sideways to see what's real. Over the next 2 days, she healed slowly. Took sips of soup on her own. Let him wrap her feet with boiled cloths and salve. She never said thank you, and he never expected her to. He wasn't doing it for thanks. The snow piled up against the windows. They didn't talk much. She kept to the far end of the room, resting on the cot he pulled out from storage. Sometimes she stared into the fire with that distant look, like she was watching something that had already happened and couldn't stop it from happening again. He noticed things, though. How she flinched when the wind slammed the shutters. How her eyes darted to the door when the horses whinnied. How she never turned her back to the room. She was not just cold. She was hunted. On the third morning, he found her outside. Barefoot in the snow, arms crossed, staring at the horizon like she expected someone to rise out of it. "You'll lose your toes," he said. She didn't turn. "He always finds me, no matter how far." "Not here." She looked at him then. Something in her expression softened barely, but was there. "You don't know him." "No, but I know this land. And I know men who think fear is the same thing as love. They burn out fast." She looked away, said nothing. But when he held out the boots she'd left by the stove, she took them without argument. He didn't ask who she was. Didn't ask what name to call her by. She was a stranger, yes, but not unfamiliar. That night, as she sat by the fire, he caught her humming under her breath. Just a little. A tune without words. Something old and aching and beautiful. He didn't interrupt. He just sat with her in the silence, letting the warmth settle between them like snow melting on stone. And when she looked up, meeting his gaze, something passed between them. Not a promise. Not yet. But a beginning. She rose slowly in the mornings, as if learning again how to inhabit her own body. Her steps across the creaking floor were soundless, careful, like a deer that had learned to survive by silence alone. He watched her without watching, never turning his head too directly, never making her feel the weight of being seen. She ate the way people do when they aren't sure the food won't vanish, measured, cautious, grateful without saying so. He left her be. That was his way. Instead, he worked. He chopped wood with steady rhythm, hauled water from the well, mended the fence where the last storm had torn through the rails like a drunk with a grudge. The land didn't care if you were tired. It needed tending, and he found comfort in that. Purpose was easier to serve than people. She began helping in the quietest ways, without asking. One morning, the stove was already lit when he came in from checking horses. The next day, she was boiling water before he'd even unlatched the front door. She patched one of his shirts too, just set it neatly folded on the table, a careful seam running through the tear near the shoulder. He didn't thank her out loud, but he wore it the next day. And she noticed. Her name was still a mystery, and he didn't press. Names carried power, and he figured she'd give hers when she was ready to reclaim that power. Until then, he called her nothing at all. Addressed her with gestures and glances, a quiet system they developed, like wind passing over tall grass, invisible but understood. He began speaking more, not to her but around her, letting words fall like leaves near her ears. Descriptions of horses. Tales of winters worse than this one. Stories of coyotes clever enough to open chicken coops and a barn cat that once chased a hawk. She listened. Not always with her eyes, but her body turned toward him just slightly. He saw it, noted the shift. She was thawing. Carefully, like spring rising from beneath a frozen earth. One afternoon, he found her sitting on the porch, wrapped in an old quilt, watching the sun drift low behind the hills. Her hands were wrapped tight around a mug of coffee she hadn't asked for, but accepted anyway. "You ride?" he asked, leaning against the doorway. She didn't answer right away. Then, softly, "Used to." He nodded, saying no more. But the next morning, He saddled the calmest mare, left the reins looped on the fence, and said nothing as he went about feeding the rest. When he returned, she was gone. The mare's tracks led toward the stream. She came back 2 hours later. Wind-blown, cheeks red from the cold, hair pulled loose under his spare hat. Didn't say a word. But there was something new in the way she walked. Something uncoiled. A quiet sort of triumph. At dinner that night, she asked, "What happened to your hand?" He looked down. The scar that ran along his knuckle was old, white like chalk on tan skin. Barbed wire. Long time ago. Thought I'd lose the finger. Didn't. She nodded. He saw the curiosity in her face then. The soft blooming of trust. She was beginning to wonder about him, just as he had wondered about her. She started humming again, under her breath, always when she thought he was too far to hear. But he heard. He recognized the melody now. A lullaby. Appalachian roots. He imagined a mother's voice once sang it, maybe before the world cracked open, and let her fall. She slept more soundly now. No longer curled into a ball, but stretched out fully on the cot. He heard her breathing change at night, slow and even. No more gasps. No more sudden starts. He noticed other things, too. The scar on her hand was from a burn, not an accident. Her left ankle had a stiffness to it, old injury by the look of it. Her knuckles bore tiny lines, as if once clenched into fists too long. This woman had fought. Not with fists, maybe, but with spirit. With escape. One night, as the wind screamed through the trees and the chimneys sang with the draft, she broke her silence. "I ran because I thought dying in a snowstorm was better than staying." He didn't look at her, didn't move. Just kept feeding the fire with kindling, his back turned gently toward her voice. "I wasn't going to stop walking," she said. "Didn't care what happened." He let the silence stretch. When it began to tighten, he spoke. "You should have walked further north. You'd have missed me altogether." "I didn't choose," she said. "My legs gave out." He smiled faintly, unseen. "Well," he said, "bad luck for both of us then." That night, the silence between them was no longer empty. Days folded over each other, like worn pages in a book. They mended routines together. He chopped, she swept. He fixed saddles, she stirred soup. They didn't laugh, not yet, but they shared quiet moments of agreement. The kind that don't need names. That say, "I see you without the weight of being seen." He noticed how she never walked near the windows when the wind blew hard. Never let her back face the door. Sometimes he'd find her holding a knife, just a little too long, after peeling potatoes. He didn't ask. He didn't have to. Instead, he let her feel strong again. Capable. She took to brushing the horses in the mornings. Soft strokes. Firm hands. Animals trusted her. He did too, more than he meant to. One morning, she asked to help with the fence repair. He showed her how to hammer nails with a straight wrist, how to hold the wire with a piece of leather to keep from getting sliced. Her hands were clumsy at first, but steady. By noon, they'd finished a quarter-mile together. By sunset, she was smiling. And it wasn't small. That night, as they ate by lantern light, he told her a story. About a mare that once refused to foal unless she was sung to. He sang a verse then, off-key, soft, and she covered her mouth with her hand, stifling a laugh. "Was that supposed to be singing?" she asked. He grinned. "Didn't say it was good singing." A beat passed. Then, hesitantly, she said, "I used to sing in church. When I was little. Still do, I'd say." She looked up sharply. He gestured toward her lips. "You hum." A blush rose in her cheeks. "I forget I do that." "Don't forget." She watched him then, longer than she ever had. Something in her gaze changed. Deepened. A question lingered there. Not asked. Not ready. But waiting. 2 days later, she stood beside him at the fence line as the wind stirred the bare trees. "You built all this yourself?" she asked. He nodded. "Took time." "Why?" He squinted toward the fields. "Didn't have anything better to build." She looked down, then said quietly, "It's good. It holds." He turned to her then, really turned, and saw the weight of those words. Not just about the fence. About him. That evening, he built a bench beneath the big cottonwood near the barn. Didn't say why. Just made it and left it there. The next morning, he found her sitting on it, wrapped in a shawl, staring at the pink sky. There was a stillness in the air. A balance. Something fragile that didn't feel broken anymore. She didn't speak as he approached, just patted the space beside her. He sat. For a long while, there were no words. Only the wind in the grass and the distant rhythm of hooves in the pasture. Then, just as the sun reached its highest point, she said it. "You never asked me my name." He looked down at his hands, then at her. Didn't want to take what wasn't offered. Her eyes softened. "I think I'm ready to give it." She said her name, and he closed his eyes. Not because he was surprised, but because he understood what it cost her to say it. It was not love. Not yet. But it was something like beginning again. The days rolled on, heavy with the weight of winter but lightened by a rhythm neither of them had expected. There was no need to name what was forming between them. Some things resist being pinned down like that. They simply are. Like snow drifting quietly in moonlight, or a fire that burns steady, not bright. She spoke more now, though never all at once. Her words came like spring thaw, slow, deliberate, sometimes pooling into silence before they continued. And he never rushed her. He listened the way one listens to weather, carefully, knowing it changes with every breath. It was during one of those slow mornings, with frost clinging to the windows and coffee curling steam between them, that she told him. "I was promised," she said, tracing the rim of her mug, "to a man I didn't choose. Didn't know." He didn't answer. Just watched the steam rise like spirits. "My father called it good match. Said he owed him something, land, I think, or favors." She paused. "He had a temper. That's what they said. The man I was promised to. They warned me not to talk back, not to think too much." Her voice didn't shake, but her fingers did. "I tried to be small, tried to be quiet, tried to disappear inside what they wanted from me. But even that wasn't enough. He didn't want a wife. He wanted an echo." The room held its breath. "So I ran, took what I could carry. Thought I'd rather freeze to death in a stranger's field than spend one more day as someone else's shadow." He looked at her then, not pitying, not afraid, just seeing her bone deep. "You were never a shadow," he said. She smiled faintly, then stood and busied herself with the fire. But the silence between them had changed again. It was no longer cautious, it was shared. That afternoon, he saddled 2 horses. "I figured," he said, "if you're going to stay, you should know the land." They rode out slow, following the creek until it bent through the cottonwoods. The prairie was muted beneath its snow blanket, but alive underneath. Rabbits darted between brush, and a hawk soared overhead, cutting lazy circles in the pale sky. He showed her the old windmill, long dead but still proud. The ravine where he once nearly lost a calf in a flood. The place where the fence gave way every spring and had to be rebuilt by hand. She listened, asked questions. And once, as they paused by the stream, she touched his hand where it rested on the saddle horn. Just a moment. But it was enough. As they rode back, dusk bleeding orange along the edge of the hills, she said softly, "Why did you build all this alone?" He didn't answer right away. Just let the wind speak for a bit. "Didn't know how to build anything with someone else," he said at last. She turned that over in her mind the rest of the way home. The next few days were quiet, but full. She began drawing, on scraps of brown paper, with charcoal she found in the wood bin. Simple things at first, the barn, the horses, the stove. Then sketches of the bench under the cottonwood. A bird perched there, a pair of boots beside it. She never signed them, but he recognized her hand and lines, precise, thoughtful, full of memory. He cleared a space on the shelf and began setting them there one by one. In return, he began to carve. A small horse, rough at first, then a spoon, a comb. Gifts she didn't expect but took with quiet awe. Not because they were perfect, but because they were offered. She started singing again. Not humming. Singing. Softly, sometimes in the mornings as she washed dishes or swept near the stove. Songs that sounded older than the walls, full of longing and survival. And once, as she sat on the porch, brushing the old mare's mane, she said, "You don't talk about her." He looked up from where he was mending a saddle strap. "My mother," she said, clarifying. "Or your people." He thought about that. Took a long breath. "My mother died in spring," he said. "Too soon. She used to sing, too. Always had dirt on her hands and honey in her voice." He paused. "My brother went west, chasing something. Never came back. I stopped chasing after that." She nodded, her eyes distant. "Some of us stop chasing," she said. "Some of us run until we forget what we're running from." They didn't say more, but a chord had struck between them, deep and low. That night, she handed him a drawing. It was of the 2 of them, seated on the bench beneath the cottonwood. She hadn't drawn their faces, just their shapes. The way they leaned toward each other. A single cup of coffee between them. A firelight glow in the distance. He touched the edge of the paper with reverence. "You see everything," he said. She met his gaze. "Only what's worth seeing." It was then that she began to linger when he passed. Her hands brushed his sleeve more often. Her steps echoed his. Her laughter, quiet, real, came easier. He built her a small shelf in the corner of the room. For her drawings. Her shawl. A space that belonged only to her. She dusted it every morning like a ritual. But beneath it all, something still curled. An old fear, quiet but watchful. He saw it in the way she looked over her shoulder on clear days. The way her breath caught when horses passed on the road beyond the hill. He knew that kind of fear. The kind that follows you even into warmth. Like a draft through closed windows. It came to a head when the stranger arrived. The man rode into town first. Too clean for a rancher. Too smooth for a drifter. Asked questions. Flashed a silver ring. Said he was looking for someone who belonged to him. Belonged. That word curled in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. The blacksmith told him he'd seen a woman out near the old ranch. Thought it was his sister-in-law helping out the man who lived there. Didn't think much of it. The stranger smiled. Tipped his hat. Asked for directions. The blacksmith hesitated, but gave them. News rode faster than horses in a town that size. It reached him before the dust settled. He stood at the window for a long time, hands clenched, watching the sky grow dark. She was out back, feeding the chickens. He didn't call her in. Didn't tell her. Just waited until she returned and looked at him, his face pale, his jaw tight. "What is it?" she asked. He hesitated. Then, someone came asking. Her eyes narrowed. Her whole body tensed. How close? Too close. She turned away, arms wrapped around herself. "I should go." "No." She faced him. "You don't know what he's capable of." "I don't care." Her voice trembled. "He'll hurt you." "Let him try." She stepped back. "This isn't your fight." He stepped forward. "It is now." Something in her broke. Not loudly, not visibly, but in the way her shoulders dropped and her hand reached for the edge of the table, like she suddenly needed the world to hold her upright. "You don't understand," she whispered. "He always finds me." "Then let him." His voice was low, steady. "He'll come to the door," he said, "and he'll find you standing behind me." A tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away before it could fall. "I don't want to run any more," she said, "but I don't know how to stop." "You just did." The room filled with silence again, but this time it was sacred, full of decision. She didn't leave that night. Instead, she placed her drawing, of the bench and the coffee and the firelight, on the shelf he built. And beside it, she laid a folded piece of paper. He didn't open it until the house was quiet. It was her name, written in her hand, next to his. Just 2 words. But everything had changed. The sky hung low that morning, bruised with the color of gunmetal and winter's breath. Snow fell in slow, thoughtful flakes, each one spinning like a secret on its way to ground. The land was quiet, holding still as if bracing itself for something it couldn't yet name. He woke before the light touched the windows, already feeling it, a shift in the air, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm or a reckoning. She was already up, standing at the kitchen sink, hands wrapped around a tin cup that no longer held heat. Her eyes weren't on anything in particular, just staring into the falling snow, as if trying to see past it. He didn't speak. He just walked over, poured coffee into the cup, and stood beside her. "I dreamt he was already here," she said softly. He knocked. "You opened the door." He smiled and said my name like it still belonged to him. He kept his eyes on the window. "It doesn't." "I know," she said. Then quieter, but sometimes knowing isn't enough. She didn't cry. Not anymore. The crying had dried up long before she arrived at his barn, that frozen morning. What lived in her now wasn't weakness. It was weariness, like something that had been burned down to coals but kept glowing, quietly refusing to go out. He set his mug down and reached for the rifle above the door, not because he planned to use it, but because it had always been a part of his mornings when the world felt unsure. She watched him, not afraid, not questioning, just aware. By noon, the first tracks appeared. One horse, well shod, coming straight from a south road, through the gate she'd once tried to flee beyond. The man riding it didn't wear urgency. He rode like he knew the land wouldn't refuse him, like it never had. She was seated on the porch when he arrived. wrapped in the same shawl she'd worn through the worst of the winter, back straight, chin up. She looked different now, weathered, yes, but not fragile. Whatever he'd come to collect no longer lived in her. She had buried it beneath frost and fire. The man dismounted with a smirk that didn't touch his eyes. He looked at her, then at the door, then at the window, where he stood in the shadows watching. He made no move to call out. Just waited. And she stood. He stepped onto the porch. "Afternoon," the man said. His voice was smooth, empty. "Been looking a long time." She said nothing. The man glanced at her hands, the way they rested loosely at her sides, not clenched, not trembling. His eyes narrowed just a little. "You've made yourself a life here, haven't you?" he said louder now, enough for the house to hear. "But this life, this land, this man, he don't know what you owe. Don't know what was signed and sealed before you ran off like a thief in the dark." She didn't move. "You're coming home," he said. He took a step closer, and the door opened. He stepped out, the rancher, the man who had never wanted a wife, never needed anyone but the land and the wind. But there was something new in the way he walked now. Something sure. He didn't speak with his hands on the rifle, didn't raise his voice, didn't warn. He just stepped between them. "She's not going anywhere," he said. The stranger's smirk widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You think you can keep her? You think hiding her out here on this patch of forgotten dirt makes her yours?" "She's not mine," he said quietly. "She's hers. And she stays because she chooses to. That's not how the law works." The wind picked up. A crow cawed from somewhere in the trees. "No," the rancher said. "That's how love works." The man spat in the snow. "You planning to kill me over a woman who don't even wear your ring?" "I'm not planning to kill anyone," he said. "But I'll die standing here before I let her take one step she doesn't want to take." A silence spread out between them, vast as prairie sky. The stranger looked past him, toward her. "You're really going to let this man speak for you?" She took a single step forward. Her voice, when it came, was steady. "He's not speaking for me," she said. "He's standing with me." Another pause. Then the stranger laughed. Shook his head like the whole world had gone sideways. "You've got sand, I'll give you that. But you forget who I am. You forget the reach I got." She tilted her chin. "No," she said. "I remember exactly who you are. And I'm not afraid of you anymore." The man stared at her, something unreadable behind his eyes. Maybe it was confusion. Maybe it was the beginning of understanding. Or maybe it was just the slow realization that what he'd come to retrieve no longer existed. He turned back to the rancher. "This isn't over." "It is," the rancher said. And the man, whatever he used to be to her, mounted his horse and rode off without another word. They watched until his figure disappeared beyond the trees, swallowed by snow and silence. She turned to the man beside her. "I don't know what happens now," she said. He looked at her, eyes soft, steady. "We build something," he said. "One post at a time." They sat on the bench beneath the cottonwood that evening. She leaned into him, not because she needed support, but because she could. His arm found her shoulders, not to claim her, but to welcome her. The snow kept falling, but the cold no longer felt like a threat. Inside, the fire waited. The drawings on the shelf fluttered slightly from the draft. The house, like its keeper, felt fuller now. Not louder, not busier, just filled with breath, with promise, with peace. As darkness stretched across the sky, she said softly, "I never believed in sanctuary before." "And now?" he asked. She thought for a long time before answering. "Now I believe in starting over." They didn't need more words. There would be more storms. There always are. But tonight they were still. They were warm. And they were home.